So welcome back, everybody. Sorry if I sound a little bit under the weather. Winter has finally caught up with me, and now I have catched something from Mother Nature, and I have no idea what it is. So if I die by the next video, sorry. But originally, going back to the topic of this video, I did not intend to actually make a response video to net neutrality. I just thought I'd make my 26-minute video explaining all my points, giving sources, you know, the typical stuff. But then I had come across a video of Steven Crowder, who I'm subscribed to, and he made a net neutrality video that was attempting to debunk it. Now, I watched through and made comments on his video, and he actually responded back. So, in a way, we've kind of like touched heads, become one integrated being. And in a sense, now I feel a little bit more obliged to actually respond to it. And to be honest, I kind of wanted to respond to it anyway. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get started with it. But I guess for just full sake of disclosure, I would have to say that I am a little bit more of the left-leaning persuasion. But I would definitely consider myself more of a centrist like most Americans. And I guess Steven Crowder is more of an individual. That's not really too important, but we'll see how it plays a factor into this. So let's get started. And I just skipped through the intro. Nothing really important.
Net neutrality. So before we move on, I get that this is a sensitive topic. I want you to answer the question of the day, but I want you to watch this entire video first. Not only am I asking you, what's your opinion on net neutrality? Everyone's doing that, like, what's your opinion? But what's your opinion on today's sort of selective corporate outrage? Because that's what's
outrage is pretty damn universal.
Outrage over corporations, their control over the internet, while ignoring the world's biggest corporations who are ardent supporters of net neutrality. And that's something that concerns me and gets a little lost in the cracks. Both sides have arguments with merit. So
the thing is, though, is that outrage tends to be fairly universal. When you refer to ISPs getting outrage, that's not entirely unique. Companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of them get outraged, especially over practices that influence the free flow of information, especially YouTube nowadays with its adpocalypse that constantly fucks over anything that isn't family friendly, and that has been absolutely been put against them a million times over and over. It's probably even why the YouTube Rewind this current year has been absolutely lampooned, but let's continue.
I want to kind of get into those who are very pro-net neutrality and why they believe so and why there's validity to it. Listen, I'm going to roll a clip here, and it's not because I don't like Philip DeFranco.
More of a left-leaning individual, too. Franco it is.
He's one of the few fair-minded people on the internet. He's
definitely fair-minded
on the show. Hopefully we'll have him on soon. I'm actually rolling this clip of Philip DeFranco because he's talked about net neutrality for a long time, and I think he's a pretty good
so is Steven Crowder. He's
talked
about it forever.
Opposition to, I guess, sort of the current allowing of lapsing of legislation feel. So let's let him set up that side of the argument.
A certain cell service says, hey, if you go with us when you watch Netflix, that doesn't go towards your data cap. Or maybe it's with Hulu or whoever. Now imagine your broadband.
Cell service has actually done that before, where they have made certain streaming websites or websites and services in general excluding from data cap counts to promote them. That's not necessarily unique with mobile carriers. Landline doesn't really happen considering there's no data caps on landline.
Right in your home, all of a sudden you have Comcast. They say, hey, guess what? When you use Hulu, you get the top tier, the premium speed. And they have an incentive. They own a good percentage of Hulu. But then, guess what? Netflix, Amazon Prime, those places don't get our fast lane for the...
Which has happened before. Comcast has slowed the speed to Netflix at some point, and then they eventually increased it once they got a payment from Netflix.
It's slower, it's clunkier. Maybe if Netflix or Amazon Prime, they pay us, we'll give them the fast lane. You gotta pay a tax if you want to go over our fast lane for it. Imagine if Comcast or another ISP launched a competitor to YouTube, and then they could just slow down the speeds to YouTube for their customers, which you could argue, and the chairman of the FCC now does. Well, hey, if an ISP is going to do that, the market will decide we don't want Comcast. The market will keep companies honest and fair, and no. You know how many people have Comcast and they don't want Comcast, but they have to have Comcast because there aren't really any other option?
And to actually provide evidence for Philip DeFranco's point, I did mention this in my previous video, but quick little statistic here. This light blue right here means there's 2 ISPs within the same area, and as you can see, the vast majority of Americans have 2 ISPs or less. If you include 3 ISPs, then that would encompass pretty much the most of Americans, but yes, there is very few options when it comes to ISPs for most Americans.
Okay, I like Philip DeFranco, but there's an irony there that we're looking at the same...
All he has to do is just prove his point, provide a point to the contrary.
Conclusion. He's saying, could you imagine if your broadband company did what your mobile carrier company did? I'm going, could you imagine if broadband was finally as good as the mobile carrier plans out there?
Exactly right.
Doesn't really address his his point, especially that last one. But we'll see if he can link this back in eventually.
Right. And he's talking about creating a competitor to YouTube.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who's been very outspoken, as we have, about YouTube selectively curating and censoring people. So I'm going to come back to that, which is also why I find it kind of odd when people just gloss over something. Here's clip B.
Google issued a
Gloss over something, and yet he completely forgets about the point about ISPs. And how does the YouTube quote-unquote censorship play a factor into this? Because YouTube is not really an ISP. Equivocating to them to ISPs is kind of false. YouTube only has control over their information and their website and their data. That cannot be said for ISPs. They have control over all access to data to the consumer. And with net neutrality repealed, they could actually manipulate that to their whims.
statement saying the FCC's net neutrality rules are working well for consumers, and we're disappointed in the proposal released today.
Yeah, Google, huge supporter of net neutrality. We'll come back to that and go, well, why? Because it shouldn't really affect them directly. Okay, few claims that come from...
It shouldn't affect them directly. Of course it would affect them directly if ISPs had a little vendetta against them or somehow restricted internet access to their consumers, which ISPs have the ability to affect millions of people's access to the internet. Of course this would affect them. They would potentially see a huge amount of traffic decrease to their websites, or that would fuck over YouTube, considering a lot of their money is made through their AdSense program.
Net neutrality. Before I get to that, let me set up a worldview. Here's what I think is important, okay? And again, please just hold your thoughts. This is meant to be a discussion on net neutrality because there are reasonable voices on both sides of this issue. It is nuanced, and anytime you get into tech dialogue, people can get really confused.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to try and avoid...
I suppose that could be the case.
Do you believe that human beings are inherently prone to corruption? Yes? Okay, so do I.
Self-interested, of course.
Corporations are inherently prone to corruption?
People, of course.
Yes. Do you believe that people/corporations are inherently prone to corruption the bigger and more powerful they get? Yes, we both agree. Now, do you believe the only exception to that is YouTube, Google, Facebook, and the United States federal government? If not, you're going to have some apprehension about net neutrality, okay?
Well, I assume if most people have that cognitive dissonance where they give one set of parameters for one type of company and a different parameter for a different company, then yes, I could see that. But like going back to the outrage thing, most people hold ISPs and data providers pretty accountable for the free flow of information across their websites. The issue is that ISPs and data providers are still not the same thing. ISPs, like I said before, can actually influence quite a bit more than what Google can do over their websites alone. Say if ISPs wanted to block Republican content to favor a Democratic election, well, guess what? They could block a shitload of people. Laura Southern, Stephen Molyneux, Steven Crowder, InfoWars, Fox News, and other right-leaning publications. They could block it all. And in favor of that, it could speed up things, like the Young Turks or whatever possible left-leaning articles or websites that you would disagree with. That's the thing is that there's two different situations here. One has control over their stuff alone and their intellectual property, while ISPs have the ability to affect stuff that isn't theirs.
That's where the worldview comes in. So let's look at it through that lens. Here are some of the things that people claim with net neutrality. We need net neutrality because there aren't enough ISP choices, internet service providers. And the market, as I said, they don't have. It only has power if there are enough choices. Mm-hmm.
And a great thing, great point to point out. The thing is that you just provide a simple little explanation, simple little source that says, hey, there is a healthy, nice, competitive market within landline data prevention. There's no need to be concerned about this. All you got to do is cite it then if that's going to be your main argument.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know who actually would most benefit and most...
Okay, avoid that point entirely, okay.
Small rural ISPs. That's something a lot of people don't talk about.
Well, of course, net neutrality wouldn't, how would I say, improve the monetary gain for rural ISPs. If these ISPs have a monopoly or a lack of competition within their area, then net neutrality would just allow them to split up the internet service into tiers and actually charge more for it. I mean, that would affect small ISPs, and that would affect large ISPs, that would affect all ISPs, because that would allow them to ink more profit from, providing the same or less service. Not really sure how this is specifically going to fuck them over, but let's take a look here.
Just Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, it's easy to talk about big evil corporations and not talk about the smaller companies that would stand to benefit. So net neutrality can really harm smaller ISPs. Under net neutrality, as we have them now, ISPs have to submit proposals for any new technology, or I think it's new technology or business model. This is the exact quote. So on top of all the red tape, right, and all of the costs, the burdening costs, the FCC can also turn down proposals without giving the company any opportunity to appeal. Does that sound like fostering innovation? Does that sound like something that would encourage competition?
Well, the thing is, are you talking about net neutrality, or are you talking about the regulations around net neutrality or its package? Because the thing is, net neutrality is specifically mentioning the policy where ISPs cannot discriminate data to people's or consumers' homes. That is like the main thing people want to protect. That's the thing Philip DeFranco was talking about in his video. If you're talking about like various bureaucracy and red tape that slows innovation, or like the patent process or things like that, then yeah, feel free to criticize that. Those, though, are two, I would say, kind of separate issues. If you want to get rid of the local tape that's slowing down growth of ISPs, then sure, by any means. The thing is, though, is that you also kind of have to mention the more broader aspects of this. So you can mention the fact that the federal government, in a way, is stifling, I would say, ISP growth by making the process a little bit longer, making it a little bit more costly. But then you also have to mention things like, say, if the ISP gave, I don't know, say, a tax credit to ISPs that I'm pretty sure some of you have known about. This tax credit that has given, I think, close to $400 billion to them over the course of from the 1990s to the current time. You also have to mention how that also, influenced ISPs and how that promoted growth. But the thing is, you also have to consider local regulations that ISPs have the ability to influence. So say if an ISP has a monopoly in a municipality, they could lobby the municipality to increase regulation that would basically make it borderline impossible for a new ISP to come into a market and actually compete with them. Say there's this one where Google Fiber was actually trying to break into cities with its own fiber optic cables, and it was having a hard time since, for some reason, other ISPs had to be involved in the process of actually installing Google's own wires, which made it take, 6 months to lay fiber optic cable, which made it borderline, I would say, unfeasible for them to actually implement it, to the point where they had gone to a more creative route and actually just try to subvert it using Wi-Fi antennas to provide a more lackluster service, because these ISPs are being such a hindrance to growth. And this is Google with Google Fiber, and they have an assload of money. Think about smaller companies that can't afford to have labor sitting around for months on end waiting for the day that the other ISP can send a truck out to install this wire every time they wanted to install cables of some sort. That's more of a hindrance than, say, net neutrality. If you're trying to go for the route of saying that net neutrality is somehow hindering ISP growth, I would argue that it's more or less probably the local municipalities and monopolized ISP actually hindering growth of other ISPs. Let's continue.
We also hear that we need to impose monopoly laws on ISPs in areas where there's little competition. So this goes back to kind of telecom communication companies, right? Title II, regulating them like that. A lot of people have talked about regulating YouTube and Facebook and Twitter as a telecommunication company.
I really haven't heard too many arguments actually in favor of regulating YouTube and websites that have control over their own data, like utilities. I haven't seen a whole lot of arguments for that.
Under Title II, and I've defended them and said, no, I don't think that anyone should force them to treat content equally. But that ties into why there's a reason that they actually support net neutrality. We'll come back to that. So there's actually this article from Fast Company.
Hi, I'll present a point and then I'll debunk that later.
And this is what they write about. They write about.
Debunk it now.
What's the name of the company? I think it's
Cable One,
yep. Right?
Oh, and just a quick little reminder, Google itself is not an ISP unless you're talking about Google Fiber, which is specifically an off-branch of Google that does actually install internet. Google itself, or its various proprietaries like YouTube, more or less data providers that actually have control over their own websites.
So they talk about Cable One covering being the only option, right, for broadband in rural areas, okay? And so this is an article that they write about. They talk about how if they were regulated under Title II as telecommunication companies, well, the government would actually be able to set the rates because Cable One keeps raising the prices. Now, they keep raising the prices. Why? Because they're the only one there. So they say that they're raising prices. Now, that being said, their prices are somewhere around $80 per month, which is actually pretty much right middle of the road. It's not like it's...
So they haven't actually set rates yet for consumers and like this. You're actually not actually advocating against a policy. You're advocating against a theoretical policy that could be theoretically imposed. So this is not even something that's actually even in the real world yet. I'm not entirely sure why you're talking about this point then. It's unusual.
It's completely outlandish. Right. Sure. But these articles that have been sent to me by Fastco, I've had this sent to me a dozen times. Think about this for a second. Let's assume, okay, the smaller rural ISP, Cable One, is evil and their only goal is to screw people, and that's why they're jacking up prices. What happens if the government does set rates on Cable One? Let me ask you this, genuinely, what do you think happens? Do you think that if there's a set ceiling, Cable One is going to be providing better internet? Do you think they're going to be upgrading their servers? Do you think they're going to be upgrading, their abilities? They're going to be upgrading their speeds? They're going to be creating better packages? Or...
Well, that's probably not due to the fact that this Cable One company is having their data rates fixed, which, remind you, he is not saying their rates are actually being fixed yet, but what is probably actually attributing to their lack of innovation is more than likely the fact that there's no competition in the area. Without competition, there is no need to innovate. There is no need to improve your services, bargain your prices, make it cheaper when no one else in the area is going to offer a cheaper, better, and a superior product in general. No one's going to be doing that, so there's no need for Cable One to do it to begin with.
If the rates are set, do you think it's more likely that they're just going to say, all right, this is where we are? And let me ask you this, do you think it's more or less likely if the rate is set in that area, let's say rural Mississippi, for another competing ISP to come in and make a killing putting Cable One out of business? Where is it more or less likely for those people to get better internet service? So another claim.
In both situations, it would probably be equally less likely for both of them to happen, since local regulation is probably the main contributing factor to actually limiting ISP growth. And on top of this, you're still talking about a theoretical price fixing, which you haven't actually shown that has happened yet, but you say can happen. The thing is, we're still working in the territory of theoreticals.
Claim that we hear a lot is if we repeal net neutrality, there will be separate packages, right? This is what Philip DeFranco, a lot of people talk about. Internet access, video streaming, emails, that'll be split up, that they'll be throttled, right?
They will likely can be split up. I believe in somewhere, I think it was like Portugal or Spain, they repealed net neutrality rules, and they had an inkling of actual tiered services come through. So it is likely to happen, considering they've done it with TV.
Slope without a lot of support. There are only 2 instances, and they're a little more complicated than people let on. I think it was Comcast with Netflix, and AT&T hit a huge fine for throttling people if they're unlimited, putting them back down to slower speeds. But all of that was corrected, not because of legislation, but because it was immediately made public, and it was so toxic that people started dropping their plans.
Well, the thing is that when it comes to mobile data, they actually have the ability to drop plans, but when it comes to ISPs, for a lot of people, they do not have that luxury of having multiple ISPs to choose from. And on top of that, the Comcast and Netflix thing specifically was actually corrected by the fact that Netflix actually did pay Comcast to restore speeds. That's why there was randomly a huge spike in speed to Comcast, to Netflix after Netflix paid Comcast. That was like the whole big debacle because people were saying, "Oh no, they're, I would say, extorting money from Netflix," and what that could imply to smaller companies that can't pay such a high toll.
It was pissed.
The market was pissed. Mobile data plans, remember how they used to be so extremely limited? Yeah. They were packed, and people now are fearing that broadband
were extremely limited. They still are extremely limited. Hell, I can buy an unlimited data package, but when it comes to landline, I can buy different speeds of unlimited package. When it comes to mobile data, I can either spend $70 to get unlimited data, which would give me close to 70, 60 megabytes here. And on my phone, that could probably be maybe like 10 megabytes per second. So I mean, still the mobile data is still not nearly as good or effective as landline in many ways.
Packages will be like that without net neutrality. Where have you seen more competition? Where have you seen your rates become more competitive, your plan become better? Your mobile data plan or broadband?
Well, the thing is that mobile data and landline data are pretty much two separate beasts entirely. Mobile data is a lot easier to set up. It just go over the air. You set up one cell tower, you can service a huge area of people. With landline, you get to physically lay down wire to each building. I can, a little bit more pricey to set up each one, as you can imagine. And on top of that, when it comes to, say, Google or this ISP and mobile data naturally has a lot more competition due to that. That's why you had these better price bargaining and more innovation, is because there's more competition. You cannot say that's the same case for ISPs. I could pull up that statistic again that shows that most Americans have 2 or less options.
What you're paying for right now. Because now mobile plans are unlimited with faster and faster speeds thanks to a free market. Another claim that we hear a lot is that...
unlimited plans. Thank God I still have an unlimited plan with my landline connection. In fact, I can still choose my speed. Still, this equivocation of mobile and landline data is still unusually odd for me.
We have to have net neutrality because big evil corporations. People think, well, because a big company supports it, it must be bad. But then there's another big company that supports it. And in this...
Well, it's not just because they can support it that's bad. Well, it could be a factor for some people. The issue is that a big corporation with a monopoly and has their own self-interest, because you have to remember a lot of these ISPs own smaller data websites, like, say, AT&T, I think, owns CNN, and how they could favor that with net neutrality rules repealed. That could happen. So if an ISP wanted to, say, favor left-leaning sites that they owned while throttling right-leaning sites to their customers, they could do that. They would have the much more authority to do that to all their millions of customers. On the other hand, Google will not be able to, since they only have control over their own websites, and on top of that, they're not ISPs.
In this case, you have the world's biggest companies in Google and Facebook, who, by the way, unlike the ISPs, they have a long and storied history of dishonest censorship and throttling and content favoritism. Facebook alone, I don't know how many...
Just want to point this out real quickly. He's not actually citing anything within the article itself. He's citing the headlines.
Tens of times, and this begs the question, why is Google, YouTube, and Facebook, why are these giant companies so adamant about supporting net neutrality? Here's something else crazy. Big companies like Google, they're not really customers of ISPs. They connect directly to the web, directly through internet exchange points.
Well, the thing is, they're customers. Customers that actually use Google's products and services need and actually are affected by these internet regulations. So the less, I would say, restriction there is on data, and these consumers are able to go wherever they want, that would actually theoretically benefit these companies, because they could display more ads to people. People would spend more time on the internet. They would have less restrictions and stuff like that. So in a way, I mean, it isn't because Google's supporting it because it's regulation that doesn't strangle them. In a way, it just is regulation that allows for unhindered access of consumers to use the internet as much as they can humanly desire. That, I mean, in a way, it's just like, hey, we're trying to make the consumer use as much as humanly possible. We're trying to benefit them as much as possible. So in a way, that kicks back onto us, not as opposed to a way that just like pretty much exclusively benefits the data provider like Google.
So it doesn't directly affect them. But you'd be hard-pressed to find people who would
Affect them,
support
though.
regulating YouTube, Google. Certainly small government libertarians as a telecommunications company under the guidelines that would basically force them to allow all content to be uploaded and distributed equally. But I would support, and this is a big step for a libertarian, small government libertarian like me, under Title II, if we agree to transparency laws, which is a big part of the repealing of net neutrality right now. It's, okay, listen, first off, there are still antitrust laws. There are still monopoly laws.
I'm not sure if transparency laws are really the big issue when it comes to net neutrality. I think when it comes to net neutrality, the big thing with net neutrality is not transparency, but net neutrality itself. The idea that data should not be discriminated from ISPs. It's kind of the main central point here.
So if you're to throttle, which you're not supposed to do, you have to let your customer base know. Yeah. That's a big part of this legislation. That's a big part of this change, is transparency is being given the priority. Now, I would not support regulating YouTube, Facebook, Google under Title II if it's, you have to treat all
because they're not ISPs.
Right. But I would support putting them under that kind of regulation if it just means that they have to be transparent with people using YouTube. Hey, listen, you can throttle conservative content. You can tell conservatives they can't upload. You can tell people who are politically incorrect that they can't upload. You can allow pedophiles to upload to YouTube Kids all you want, but you have to disclose it to your user base. And that's why when you put the puzzle pieces together and you think about it, you go, hold on a second, why would YouTube and Google and Facebook be such huge supporters of net neutrality if it didn't affect them? I think it opens the door to people saying, hey, we can regulate an industry here just by ensuring that they are transparent. Basically, the government is a referee.
Well, the thing is, transparency, that wouldn't really help a whole lot of consumers. For example, in a situation where, say, Cable One had a monopoly over an area, and they say, hey, we're going to block certain access to left-leaning and right-leaning websites, or whatever in between. Consumers really couldn't fight back against it because the only way they could do that is just by cutting off all of their internet access entirely, which for a lot of businesses would really hinder transactions, credit cards, pretty much anything crucial to doing modern day business. So in a situation, transparency is still not the main focal point, but still wouldn't really solve anything and wouldn't really create a better environment. We're still talking about net neutrality here, Crowder. Stay topic.
At that point, the government is a referee with its whistle saying, hey, you're breaking the rules there. We're going to put you in the penalty box. On the other hand, you have a fence right here, right? You have a line. So people talking about evil corporations, you're saying, okay, this is the big evil corporations are against net neutrality. Okay, here's the line. On one side, you do. You have Verizon, you have AT&T, you have Comcast, you have small rural ISPs as well. You have a lot of companies, okay? That's on this side of the line. On the other side, you do have Google, YouTube, Facebook, and potentially the federal government.
And the consumer. The issue is that when it comes to a situation like this where it's really ISPs versus corporations, it's really more or less ISPs actually versus the consumers, because the thing is that this doesn't really negatively directly affect the data providers like Google. They're independent of this. They're fucked over because the consumer is fucked over, not because they're directly fucked over. Because the issue is that with net neutrality repealed, what that does is that to the individual consumer, they could see lack of competition spike. They could see data packages introduced to landlines. They could see tiered services provided. They could just see an overall quality, or they could even see a restriction to what websites they could actually visit. These are the things that could actually hinder the free flow of consumers to various websites, which then subsequently affects where Google can put their advertisements. Because if they can put more advertisements on more websites where people can actually see, then they would make more money. So they're really not, I would say, on the other side of ISPs, they're really just, I would say, off-branching from the consumers, trying to leech off their viewership. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy and a weird situation. It's really more or less ISPs versus the consumers, and the federal government is going to try to favor the consumers in this case. As you can imagine, the government's, naturally predisposed to actually favoring the consumer.
Now, the government is not a referee. It's not enforcing transparency. It's picking sides. They have buddies in their pocket, the biggest companies in the world. So if you want to talk about monopolies, I would certainly say that Facebook and YouTube has more of a monopoly on the transfer of information, certainly media, than Cable One.
Much more. Yeah.
I would have to respectively disagree there. Facebook has control over their information. The thing is that Cable One and all these other ISPs you keep mentioning, they have the ability to affect the information to the consumers entirely. They have the ability to block not only Facebook, Twitter, Google, and all of the publications. They could actually pick favorites in this situation. So say if Comcast wanted to start throttling content to right-leaning websites because they keep bashing, their left-leaning outlets they have, then nothing would be stopping them. They could theoretically block content to Steven Crowder's website, to Lauren Silner's website, to Stephen Meloni's website, to InfoWars, to Fox News, to whatever else is out there. and you wouldn't be able to stop them with net neutrality repealed. That's probably one of the bigger concerns. Facebook, really, they'd just be isolated to their website. They could be like, okay, yeah, we won't service people who have a right-leaning affiliation, and that would just be it. People would just then be able to go to another website, like, say, Google+, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, Snapchat, iFunny, wherever the fuck they want to go to and announce their political affiliations from. They would still have that option.
Yeah.
So false equivocation there.
700,000 households in Missouri, and they are so adamantly pro-net neutrality because precisely if people say, wow, we can actually fix this industry, we can regulate it without stepping in, just making sure that they're following the rules, just making sure that they're disclosing with their customers what they're doing, guess what?
So you're saying as long as they disclose it is okay that we can repeal net neutrality. Kind of a sketchy situation that could actually create.
You'd have a lot of people, as a matter of fact, you'd have people lining up to say, let's apply those standards to YouTube or Facebook. No, let's not do that. Let's look at the evil cell phone companies who get...
The thing is that Google, Facebook, these companies are data providers. They only have access over to their data specifically. ISPs, mobile companies, whatever you keep meandering and changing that to, those have control over all information that goes to their consumer. So with net neutrality repeal, they could have potentially a lot more, I would say, websites blocked than Google.
Gave you unlimited data and gave you free hotspots and gave you free Spotify and free T-Mobile, Netflix.
Spotify isn't free. You have to watch ads or you pay for it. And T-Mobile is a service that you have to pay for as well.
Downloading because they're the
Netflix downloading, you still have to pay for it.
Google, Facebook, we're the mom and pop shop. You don't need any transparency with us. This is why it comes back down to the worldview.
I don't understand why you keep falsely equivocating data versus ISP. It's, basically the difference between a bakery and a road.
Do you believe that anyone is exempt from the proclivity toward human corruption? I don't. Whether that's Comcast or Verizon, just like people who support net neutrality, I agree with you, but I also don't believe that Google, Facebook, and YouTube have pure motives here, nor the big government legislators who want to have their hands in the pocket. Hey, did you like that?
Like I said, selective outrage, he keeps iterating that point again. People are not having two separate standards for this. I mean, oh my fucking god. Yes, people may have a theoretical separate bias for that, but I wouldn't say that's the fucking case. I just... fucking god. But, that's not the... Oh, shit! That is not the very end of this thing yet. God, I think the earmuffs just went off that. I actually did a comment on this video, and he actually responded to it. So, let's actually go through what he said. So going through the bottom of this, I accidentally clicked something, I know that, whoops. But going down here, first comment, and I just basically rated a couple of points that I made in the video already. But at the very end, I said, also, I forgot to mention that landline data is notoriously anti-competitive. Local regulations hamper growth of competitors like crazy, and ISPs often do their best to avoid each other. That's well known amongst, anybody who knows anything amongst ISPs. But he actually responded, exactly, local regulations hamper growth of competitors, even though most of his videos talking about federal regulations, especially net neutrality and the stuff surrounding about that. And he believed the new neutrality rules regulations introduced in 2015, including an open door to rate fixing, which hasn't happened yet, and that is a theoretical, help foster growth of competitors. Well, I didn't say anything about that, considering my main argument is that net neutrality protects the consumer from, potential abuses, from splitting tiers of internet, from degrading quality of internet, from a regression, basically. That the whole point, ISPs and broadband providers are regulated in a way that stifles competition in a way that mobile carriers are not. Yet you want more regulation to fix it. I simply disagree. Well, the thing is that ISPs and broadband providers, they're not regulated by the federal government. That's what's causing, the huge stifling in competition. They actually, I would say, self-regulated in that way. What would happen in most situations is that an ISP would gain dominance in a municipality and then lobby the local government to create regulations that would basically make it very difficult to actually lay new wires down in this area and actually become competitive with them without paying, you know, an asinine amount of money or wasting a huge amount of time. That's why Google, even though they have an absurd amount of resources in their name, still can't actually get Google Fiber down in a lot of cities because of these local regulations. So really blaming net neutrality and the federal government for doing this, especially considering that federal government has actually subsidized a hell of a lot of infrastructure improvements over the years, is still quite a, you know, dishonest comparison. And on top of that, mobile data, still a different beast entirely, and is much easier to set up and much easier to have competition within, you know, mobile data. And on top of that, mobile data is still a fair bit shittier than landline data, even with all that extra competition. So kind of an unusual comparison. I don't know why he keeps on making it. It's two different beasts entirely. It's false equivocation, I believe. And yet I responded to him from that as well, basically with the same argument. So you can read through that if you like. But this entire video from start to finish, so I don't know if anything else about that. So if you have any comments or concerns about this video or of my rebuttal, feel free to leave it down below. But other than that, make sure to like and subscribe. I should be returning to my regularly scheduled gaming content soon, so sorry for all these offshoots in this very weird net neutrality political direction. Not usually my my little soiree. But other than that, I don't know what else to say. The social media links down below if that's your thing. Discord if you want to join the community. And other than that, I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.